Chapter 9. Holmes assumes the trust. It was well into the afternoon when I finally stumbled from my bed, giving vent to a series of jaw-straining yawns as I rubbed the vestiges of sleep from my eyes. Like an incoming tide, a flood of questions inundated my poor lethargic brain, but I shoved a mental finger into the dike, effectively plugging the sea of conjecture. At the moment I cared not a whit as to the dramatic happenings of late, or the potential fate of the sacred sword either. After steaming in a hot tub, performing my toilet, and dressing with care, I descended to our sitting room, feeling more the man and less like an archaic bag of protesting bones. Holmes was not alone, for Clyde Dietz at the moment was depositing his hat and gloves on the end table. "I have remarked before about your intuitive timing, Watson. Mr. Dietz is just upon the scene." Our client's face was a blend of perplexity and fatigue, with a soup corn of haunting fear. "Gentlemen," he said in a harassed tone. "Recent events are just too much for me. A fire at Macewood, Dr. Watson's disappearance, your message, Mr. Holmes, which arrived with the two riding horses." "I trust," interjected Holmes, "that there was no damage to buildings or livestock last night." "None. I can be thankful of that." Leeds' words terminated abruptly as though he were at a loss, and Holmes came to his aid. "Best we shred the fabric of secrecy. A confidential inquiry agent cannot operate at a level of efficiency without all the facts. In this case, personal knowledge, along with deduction, filled some gaps for me." "Then you know. I might have guessed that you did. But do you both," his eyes flashed to me, "understand the potential peril involved?" "More than you do," replied Holmes confidently. "For simplicity's sake, let me sum this up. The subject of your father, Captain Spaulding, and his explorations in Egypt and the Sudan is very much off limits in your household, and not once have you made mention of his fame. It was your father's hope that his name and activities would fade into the mists of time, for he wished to become a missing link with the Islamics of the desert." Holmes was speaking with such fluency that I suspicioned a communique from Sir Randolph Rapp. The ex Regius Cambridge professor turned motivational expert was a veritable reservoir of vague incidents and half-known truths round the world, as indicated by his monumental work, The Motivated Minds of Mankind. "Now, I resort to surmise, though I'll stake my reputation on it," continued the sleuth. "Your father had a peculiar affinity with the Arabians. During his expedition to the Sudan, he came upon a kindred spirit, a chieftain or sheik, no doubt, who had found wisdom with the passage of the years. This unknown hero realized that the sacred sword, a relic and supposedly the weapon of the Prophet Muhammad, represented a potential catalyst, a symbol that in the hands of a wild-eyed zealot could launch a flood of fierce horsemen on neighboring territories, faced as they would have to be eventually with modern artillery and disciplined troops, they would become the ingredients of a bloodbath. But oh, what carnage they could cause before the onrush could be stemmed. Deeds made as though to summon words, but then leaned back with a shrug of acceptance, indicating that Holmes had already said them. The sword does exist, authentic no doubt, and the chieftain saw means of forestalling the possible annihilation of his people. He entrusted the relic in the hands of your father to be secreted in England. Captain Spaulding fell in with the idea and may have later regretted it, for he accepted an awesome responsibility. The thought of some rebellious nomad faction tracing the symbol of our shores, to our shores, is a bit far-fetched, but agents of an advanced nation might well do that. Great powers have been known to foment insurrection where it will do harm to their adversaries. That was my father's fear, said Deeds simply. But now another piece has been placed on the board, said the sleuth, his large eyes travelling to the hearth fire, as though conjuring pictures from its dancing flames. Last night the fire was, as is obvious, a diversionary tactic to draw the attention of you and your household, while the employees of a master criminal stole the sacred sword. I could have forestalled the happening, but chose not to, for the simple reason that Chu San Fu, a name unknown to you, would just try again. Deeds was sitting rigidly upright in his chair. Do you mean you know where the sword was taken? Of course. Why would I let it disappear? I, sir, am Sherlock Holmes. Our client leaned back as though abashed. Of course. Forgive me. But what is your purpose in allowing this Oriental to gain possession of the relic? To learn of the plot that he has conceived. Chu Sanfu is the former crime czar of Limehouse and the entire Chinese community. I entertain suspicions as to his sanity, but he is a wily opponent with vast financial means at his disposal. I would not for a moment allow him to possess this potentially dangerous symbol if I thought he was working on behalf of another agency, but that is not his way. He has some personal plan involving the sword, the outlines of which are vaguely discernible to me at this moment. Then you intend to give this criminal rope, hoping to hang him with it, of course. Mr. Holmes, what would you have me do? Nothing. Was anything else removed from the vault? A negative shake of the head was Deetz's response. Then I have assumed the trust placed in your father's hands in far-off Arabia. It is I who must see that the sword does not fulfill a fateful destiny. I suggest that the fire at Macewood was the only incident that night. The robbery just never happened. Deetz's lips were pursed as though tasting the sour fruit of decision. He was regarding his hands nervously clenched in his lap, and then his eyes rose to meet those of Holmes, and the haggard expression seemed to fade from his face. I really have little choice, you know. Were I to report to the authorities the taking of an object not even known to exist, they might well send me back to my brood mares with patient words and comforting pats on the back. So be it, Mr. Holmes. The Spaulding trust now rests on your capable shoulders. When our visitor had taken his leave, I regarded Holmes with a touch of exasperation. The fact that you insist on assuming the burdens of troubled people on three continents is not unknown to me, but Holmes, by all that is holy, what have you got us enmeshed in now? A tasty problem, old fellow, and one that in future times will prompt the remark, only Sherlock Holmes could have solved it. I trust that is so, replied the sleuth, rubbing his hands together with satisfaction. He could never be faulted for underestimating his potential. All right, I must concede that the historic sword exists, and you have allowed Chu to secure it, though it seems to me you are somewhat casual about that fact. Where is the object now? Safely in the hold of the Hishauri Kamu, a tramp steamer that races anchor at Southampton with the flood tide. Holmes's answers to direct questions were sometimes vague, but this one was not, and I could only stare at him. Burlington Bertie and his friend Tiny were positioned in the railway yard when the slow freight from Lichfield arrived. My signal from the bridge allowed them to keep the proper box-car under observation, and they followed the crated wood to the Hishauri Kamu. The object is not listed on the manifest, but another singular one is refrigerated cargo, the coffin containing the body of one Sidney Purds. Who? The man on the dock. One of the attackers of Mycroft's agent that Bertie caused. You mean he killed him? Doubtful. More likely he was disposed of by Chu's order, having failed in his mission. His coffin is marked for delivery in Alexandria. I was shaking my head in a confused manner, and Holmes continued, a sharpness denoting impatience in his voice. Come, come, Watson. The sword is taken to the freighter, which just happens to list in its cargo the final remains of Sidney Puds, in life employed by Chu San Fu as an assailant. Surely too much coincidence there. The sword is by now concealed in the coffin, and since we know that it is ticketed for Alexandria, that is the sword's destination. Can you conceive of any reason why the body of a yegg of the London underworld is being transported to Egypt, save to provide a place of concealment for the fabled weapon? But why, Holmes, is the sword going to Egypt? As is your wont, Watson, you have stumbled over the main problem facing us. Why, indeed? That is the answer we seek, and fortunately we have time. The Hishauri Kamu, being of the tramp variety, is slow, with many ports of call on her schedule. Until she reaches Alexandria, the sword is completely safe, and we are allowed a breathing spell. Which we certainly need, I began, but before I could expound further on this subject, Holmes interrupted, as though in haste to clear the air and move. to other matters. Spare me, good chap, a lament regarding questions breeding more questions. The sword exists, that we know. Chu San Fu has it, for we saw his minions steal it. We know where it is and where it is headed. Now we must find a connective link, for surely Egypt brings to your mind Mycroft's dead agent, his mention of Chu San Fu, and the unusual and ancient relic that he had secreted in his person. But was not Mycroft imbued with the idea of an ancient tomb? The Prophet Muhammad antedates ancient Egypt not by centuries, but by thousands of years. Three at least, agreed Holmes. You put it well, old fellow. We must think more on this. When Holmes thought, he required facts to form a framework for his speculations. This meant research, and there is no searcher more detailed than the one who does not look for knowledge, but augments knowledge already acquired. The latter is armed with the indispensable, for he knows where to look for what he seeks. Our rooms at Baker Street, with the numerous case histories in which I took great pride, and Holmes's commonplace books along with the newspaper files, produced a semi-library atmosphere. This was augmented by an inflow of work on Egypt and the valley of the Nile that captured all available table space, spilling over to piles on the floor that I tried to keep orderly. I recalled those early days when fate, in the form of my chance meeting with young Stamford at the Criterion Bar, had first thrown Holmes and me together. I had estimated his fund of knowledge in a rather cavalier manner, while conceding that he had a profound grip on chemistry and an intense familiarity with sensational literature. I had listed his understanding of philosophy and astronomy as nil, and his grasp of politics as feeble. Things had changed during the years. First, my friend had become well versed in astronomy, spurred no doubt by the fact that the infamous Moriarty had penned the dynamics of an asteroid which enjoyed a European vogue. Then his facile mind reached out into other fields, not all connected with the solution of crime. His ability to sustain feverish periods of intense mental activity allowed him, once his teeth were implanted in a subject, to stay with it until it was wrestled into a workable form with familiar features. I have lived through Holmes's flirtation with medical architecture, as well as his romance with 16th-century music, which climaxed in his monograph upon the polyphonic motets of Orlandus Lassus, considered by experts as the final word upon the subject. Now, it was Egyptology that the sleuth was gripping by the throat, albeit it was not a choice dictated by whim, but motivated by our activities of late. Possibly it was also a rebirth of a previous infatuation dating from his Montague Street days. Whatever, most hours found my friend immersed in some volume or another, more often three or more simultaneously. Such was the retentiveness of his splendid mind that several days later He devoted our entire dinner hour to deliver a detailed recounting of Giovanni Balzoni's Egyptian and Nubian operations, a man unknown to Holmes a week before. Egyptian architecture, jewelry, religions of ancient Egypt, a number of suggestions as to how the pyramids were constructed. The list was endless. Finally, I chose to ignore the whole matter before I began to imagine desert sand in my food. Holmes was on an Egypt spin, and he was looking for something. Painfully obvious was the fact that he wasn't finding it. However, all the ensuing days and nights were not sedentary. My friend had his pack sniffing upwind. One day, having conducted several patient calls, I wasted some time pleasantly with a medical friend at the Bagatelle Club bar. Then I chose to walk back to Baker Street. In the vicinity of the Strand, I spied Holmes standing under the awning of a book dealer, an open volume in hand. Next to him, also in a studious pose, was Slippery Styles. That they were conversing in monosyllables without moving their lips, I was sure. A bookstore was, sorry, as a meeting place, was a favorite device of Holmes's, and I now knew firsthand that he was keeping Chu San Fu under close observation.